So Rebecca Solnit is a San Francisco-based writer, historian, and activist. Her books include the seminal Men Explain Things to Me, Hope in the Dark, A Paradise Built in Hell, as well as the most recent No Straight Road Takes You There, Essays for Uneven Terrain. Her writing can also be found in periodicals such as Harper's, The Guardian, and Mother Jones. And because we are an MFA program, I do feel like it's best to let an MFA student in nonfiction come and more formally introduce us to Mrs. Solnit. So Caroline Levian will be joining us.
A few weeks ago, I had dinner with a new friend. The restaurant lighting was low and warm, which further emphasized the blanket of conversational murmur that filled the gaps in between the comfortable topics of what we should order, our jobs, and dating. But a conversation over dinner lends itself to fall into topics of the personal. In a matter of a simple question, are you close with your parents? Tears were shed and the deeply personal was revealed. Oh. Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Oh, yes. But a conversation over dinner lends itself to fall into topics of the personal. In a matter of a simple question, are you close with your parents? Tears were shed and the deeply personal was revealed. However, everything leading up to the moment of the conversational levee breaking had a beginning, middle, and end. We were telling each other stories, sharing ourselves in the company of tea candles and each other. That is all to say, I think a most inherent quality in a writer is to know how to find a story and tell it. Rebecca Solnit most definitely has this quality. Regardless of topic, she exemplifies what it truly means to be a writer. Tell a story, but do so artfully. When I read Solnit's work, I grow excited. She engages with her various subjects carefully. She draws inspiration from her experience, which gives her work a certain kind of weight and texture. I find in my own writing I am often chasing this quality of real, but in the retrospect that is gained when thinking about the craft of writing, it is not so much about bearing the factual nature of a topic, but making it feel grounded, something you cannot let go of and something that cannot let go of you. For me, when I read Rebecca Solnit's work, I slip under the wave that is her narrative style. It washes over me purposefully. She blends reportage with personal narrative, and in that precision, the stories she tells are worth reading, thus becoming all the more important. While her newest publication came out earlier this year, I often return to this particular line from her book titled The Faraway Nearby. The quote is, "We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us to love or to hate, to see or to be blind. Often too often, stories saddle us, ride us, whip us onward, tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then to become the storyteller." Thank you.
Well, it seems like the acoustic comedy continues. Thank you all so much. It's lovely to be here and to see you all, and be back in my old neighborhood. I lived at Lyon and Fulton from 1981 to 2006, and got to watch that next neighborhood metamorphose over that time. And was around this school a lot, saw the Jesuits putting on lights in honor of the victims in certain moments in history and standing up in other ways. I've always loved this university as one with a conscience, and it's just lovely to be here. How many of you are in the writing program? Oh, I should have asked how many of you aren't. Hello, writers. You know, I'm just kind of grateful to have been invited to be a writer giving a reading. Mostly these days, the things I get invited to do are conversations on stage which times go really well, but sometimes don't. And, and improvising aloud isn't my craft. Having hours to years to turn around sentences and try and figure out what I really mean and get them right is a lot more what I'm here to do. And also it felt like an invitation to read things that are not about writing per se, but that in which the writing feels central rather than doing what I've done a lot, and I'm glad I can do it, grateful I get to do it, but which is ranting about politics. And we'll have quite a few politics at the beginning and the end, and then we'll have the color orange and the color blue in the middle of this reading, as you'll see. And so this is the first essay in the latest anthology, No Straight Road Takes You There. And amusingly, I wrote a query to the New York Times. They said yes. I wrote exactly what I proposed. They said no. So I had a kind of orphaned essay, which then got published in The Guardian and became the lead essay here. And was really kind of, as you'll see, kind of a joy to write. One of those moments where an inanimate object can open up meaning, give you a window into deep time, a way to think about the world. And I often feel like in the writing I'm having an experience, and I'm hoping the reader is having something somewhat analogous. But anyway, A Truce with the Trees. For the last 50 years, David Harrington, the founder and artistic director of San Francisco's Kronos Quartet, has been playing what he calls pretty athletic music on a violin made in 1721. I've heard him play all kinds of compositions on it, from the galloping notes of Orange Blossom Special to the minimalism of Terry Riley and even the occasional bit of Bach. The instrument, made by Carlo Giuseppe Testori in Milan, has survived 3 centuries, providing music for countless audiences, and can be heard on more than 60 Kronos albums. When I first learned the age of the instrument, I was filled with wonder that a delicate piece of craftsmanship could endure for centuries, that something so small and so light could do so much, that an instrument made in the 18th century could have so much to say in the 21st. It felt like a messenger from the past and an emblem of the possible, both a relic and a promise. The violin is from before James Watt invented the steam engine, which became a voracious, ubiquitous device, devouring coal and wood, then oil, driving mills, looms, pumps, then locomotive and steamboat engines. Before we began gouging out the earth frantically to feed those steam engines and then the internal combustion engines. Before we dug out so much of the carbon that plants had so beautifully sequestered deep in the earth eons ago. Before human impact exploded into a destructive force with the power to change the acidity of the oceans and the contents of the atmosphere. The sheer thrift of an instrument that lasted so long said to me that maybe you could have magnificent culture with material modesty. Maybe you could have that the world before we, you know what? I'm going to put my glasses on because I can read. If there was bright light, I'm kind of on the glasses fence. I need them under some conditions and not others. And apparently this is some and not others. Stay. The sheer thrift of an instrument that lasted so long said to me that maybe you could have magnificent culture with material modesty, that the world before all our fossil fuel extraction and burning could be plenty elegant, and maybe that the world we need to make in response to climate change can feel like one of abundance, not austerity. But fossil fuels have been poisonous literally and politically. renouncing them in an age when renewables have become better, as in cleaner, cheaper, more universally available sources of power means giving up something that has contaminated our world and impoverished our confidence in the future. We tend to think of abundance as material stuff. I wrote this before Ezra Klein got really annoying with the word abundance. Kind of contaminated it to mean deregulation in a kind of YIMBY neoliberal way. Yeah. But I have opinions in case you hadn't noticed. So we tend to think of abundance as material stuff, but perhaps our piles of loot overshadow less tangible things that also matter, including continuity with the past, confidence in the future, and the cultural richness that is not just a commodity. Harrington's violin is clearly a working instrument, a little battered with a worn finish, a lot of tiny nicks and a visible crack. Its materials are themselves a kind of global gathering, all of the original ones organic and not involving mining, although metal tools would have been crucial to making the instrument. A violin is usually made of spruce wood on the front or belly and of maple on the back, sides, and neck. Traditionally, a violin's fingerboard and tailpiece were made of ebony from South Asia or Africa, though because it's now an endangered tree, contemporary instrument makers mostly use other wood. The glue that holds the instrument together would have been made from boiling animal hides, and the varnish might have included shellac, made from a secretion of the South Asian lac insect, or just pine sap and some kind of vegetable oil, often linseed oil from flax seeds. The strings were once made of sheep gut, not cat gut, popular though the term was, though these days they tend to be metal and synthetic materials. Rosin made from tree resin and rubbed on the horsehair of the bow allows for the instrument to sound on the strings. Without it, Harrington notes, the instrument would be silent. When I was an unpromising child violinist, the clear amber lump of rosin was one of my favorite things about playing the instrument. Nearly all bows are still strung with horsehair. Because mares tend to urinate on their tails, the ideal material is the white hair of the tail of a stallion or gelding, usually from Siberia, Mongolia, Canada, or Argentina. A few years ago, a bow maker told Harrington that because of the climate crisis, it was harder to get the strong horsehair cold climates produce. For centuries, violin bows were made by preference from Pernambuco wood from Brazil's Atlantic forests, specifically from the heartwood, the dense rings of orange-brown wood at the center of the tree. These trees are likewise endangered now and avoided by many instrument makers. Bow makers and violin makers have joined conservationists to form the International Pernambuco Conservation Initiative to protect and regenerate the species in the forests in which the trees grow. Another name for that tree is Brazil, and the wood from it, Brazil wood, the entire country of Brazil was named after a tree and its wood that violin bows are made from. So one bow could bring together the Arctic and the tropics, and if it was inset with ivory, abalone, or mother of pearl, as many are, also incorporate materials from the ocean or another continent. A violin with ebony and ivory and a Pernambuco bow is a relic of the colonialism in which Europe enriched itself with materials from other continents, but it's also an all-renewable materials artifact. Mostly a violin is trees. The spruce and maple with which violins are made also face impacts from climate change. You can see the spruce rings on the front of David's violin as a series of fairly even lines of growth, but erratic weather produces erratic rings, and the spruces used for Italian violins grow in the Dolomites, and the climate there is shifting. In the Ouse Mountains is a famous forest known as the Forest of Violins, because so many instruments were made for so long with its wood. As the climate continues to change, the place may cease to be the ideal source of wood for instruments, and increasingly erratic weather worldwide could make consistent wood grain rarer too. Violin maker and scholar Nancy Benning says that woods used by Stradivari, the legendary luthier whose life straddled the 17th and 18th centuries, and his peers had a climate element to them. She writes, decades of colder temperatures in Italy, Switzerland, and Germany led to slower growth of the spruce trees. In particular, the woods used in Cremonese violins are believed to have superior tonal expressiveness and projection, thanks to the density, that is, the tightness of the tree rings, of the cold-ground spruce trees. It's the wood's vibrational efficacy and the effective production of sound that distinguishes this rare and highly valued family of violins from others, end quote. According to a report in Nature Climate Change, Norway's spruces in Central Europe now grow 1/3 to 3/4 faster than they once did. Perhaps there will be Anthropocene instruments with their own sounds from trees whose voices have changed with the climate. My violin maker friend Hans Johansson of Reykjavik is grounded in the great tradition, but facing the future with interest rather than fear. He told me, "I'm not afraid of things changing, and I don't think magic is going to disappear." Based in Iceland, he brews his own hide glue and varnishes and makes instruments with hand tools, much as Stradivari and Testori would have. His instruments are played in orchestras and quartets around the world, but he's also made experimental instruments and tested new materials. He's actually a friend of mine, and a bunch of musicians who play his instruments, violins, violas, cellos, bass viols, all got together a year, I think 2 years ago this month, to play a concert only on instruments he had made. I think the first time that's ever really happened at that scale, about 40 instruments playing music. And he started to make families of instruments, to make string quartets, violins, viola, and cello from a single sources of wood, so they're all related, so they're all essentially from the same trees and stuff. It's so amazing. As somebody who's pretty sloppy with the hands, to be in his workshop and see the precision it takes and kind of the knowledge of wood. He knocks on wood and listens for the sound. Though computers can help, the craft still relies on the ear as well as the hand. Hans notes that one of the reasons for the difficulty of mass-producing violins is the fact that the wood never has the same properties. Even pieces of spruce or maple from the same tree. When the flitches of wood are held and struck with a blow of the fist, some pieces are found to vibrate loudly with a long ringing tone, whereas other pieces sound dull and the notes die away quickly. It's conceivable that the cellos and violins he's made will be played as long as the Testori violin used by David Harrington has been, that in the year 2322, someone will be playing a Johansson violin. Like all plants, all forests, the trees from which the Testori violin was made had been pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequestering it in their wood and in the earth. The fossil fuel we burn now is an end product of carbon, sequestered by plants eons ago. The violin is a tiny carbon sink, a reserve of carbon that didn't go back into the air, but stayed here and sang. I often think of what we're doing with our frenetic burning of fossil fuels as a kind of war against the trees. It's how we put back in the atmosphere the carbon they pulled out of it and continue to pull out of it. Forests across the earth are said to sequester about 1/4 of the carbon we put into it annually. The oceans sequester more, but they're filling up with too much carbon, and that's what's acidifying them. The other 3 members of Kronos also play instruments that hail from other eras, and this was written before the other 3 of them had retired and been replaced. So, do you all know about Theseus's ship? It's the allegory. It's a ship. The ship of Theseus had its parts replaced so many times. None of the originals remained. There's a folk saying, it's a little simpler, but to the same purpose. This is my grandfather's axe. It's had 2 heads and 3 handles in its time, meaning nothing remains except the continuity, since the whole thing was never replaced. And actually, the Wikipedia entry on Theseus's ship has been rewritten so many times, none of the original sentences remain. I just read. So and Kronos, David founded it, and he's the only original member, and others turn over periodically, and he's in his 70s. You know, they're based just in the Richmond district, or the Sunset district. They are local talent who kind of revolutionized what a string quartet could be, playing contemporary, commissioned, experimental, adventurous music, not being kind of like Bach, Brahms, and Beethoven. Totally. So the other three members of Kronos also play instruments that hail from other eras. John Sherba's violin was made in New York in 1884, when atmospheric carbon was at 293 parts per million, only 16 points higher than in 1721. It was crafted the year before Carl Benz in Germany made the first petroleum-powered automobile. Sonny Yang's cello was made in Italy in 1903, when the reading was 296.8 parts per million, the same year the first Model A Ford was sold, and the Wright brothers flew the world's first successful heavier-than-air powered aircraft. Henk Dada's viola was made in Italy in 1913, 3 years after we crossed the threshold of 300 parts per million, the year the Model T became the first truly mass-produced automobile. These instruments come from a world in which petroleum-based plastic was just emerging. The great tropical forests were largely intact, and the seasonal cycles had not been disrupted, but also from a world in which Africa was largely ruled by European powers, and many human rights had hardly been conceived of, let alone realized, anywhere on Earth. The past tells many stories and always points to one story, that change is constant, for the better, for the worse. One evening, not long ago, I went to see the San Francisco Symphony's annual concert with the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir. The symphony musicians sat in a semicircle that began with violins and violas and ended with cellos and basses, and thanks to the time I'd spent contemplating David Harrington's violin, I saw it as a forest of wooden instruments. The gospel singers stood above them, and at one moment, when I could see dozens of bows moving in unison in the dimness, see 50 mouths open in song, it felt like some kind of truce between our species and the trees had been struck. Maybe that's the promise David's violin seemed to hold when I discovered how long it had been playing. At my request, he brought it over to my apartment and took it out of its case. I was a bit overawed and ready to spread a clean cloth to lay it on, but he put it on my table without any fuss and let me pick it up. It felt like a bird when I picked it up. It felt like a bird when I held it, almost weightless, incredibly powerful, and extremely delicate. And then I saw Kronos perform one more time, and there it was in David's hands, making music as it had for 3 centuries, seemingly strong enough to go on indefinitely. You can see that that was really about a reported piece that's also a meditative piece, that's also an editorial about climate change. And because there are rules and our job is to break them. And thank you. Certainly the segregationist rules about category and that separate reporting from the lyrical essay or the poetic, or that. Now I'm going to read you my most famous thing I've probably ever written. That's probably not about men. Definitely not about men explaining things to me. The one that Beyonce posted 6 months after Blue Ivy Carter was born, giving me an eternal association and incorrect overinterpretation, to my delight, and the subject of various other works of art called The Blue of Distance. So I'm just going to read the beginning. It's the second chapter of A Field Guide to Getting Lost, which turned 20 this spring. And it's actually, I originally wrote the book in 5 chapters, my editor, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was really writing in a more personal and intuitive way. I said writing by the logic of night rather than the logic of day with this one. And I didn't know if I would show it to anybody, and then I didn't know if anybody would want to publish it. And then my editor at Viking, Paul Slovak, said he'd publish it, but it was too short. And it really had formed the beginning, the 5 chapters were kind of a sequence. There was a beginning and an end. So I ended up writing the 4 Blue of Distance chapters that are interleavings, all kind of meditations in different ways on the color blue and less personal than the 5 original chapters. I felt kind of like the sorbet course to kind of calm your palate between strong flavors, or some other kind of interval between the more personal, more turbulent subjects. And it's interesting because there's often this kind of nobody bosses me around. I did just say, like, rules are for breaking. But sometimes editors and other suggestions and obligations and, you know, practical things can send you in an unexpected direction. And the Blue of Distance chapters are a vital part of what became this book. So sometimes other people have good ideas. But, you know, sometimes. The world is blue at its edges and in its depths. This blue is the light that got lost. Light at the blue end of the spectrum does not travel the whole distance from the sun to us. It disperses among the molecules of the air. It scatters in water. Water is colorless. Shallow water appears to be the color of whatever lies underneath it. But deep water is full of this scattered light. The purer the water, the deeper the blue. The sky is blue for the same reason, but the blue at the horizon, the blue of land that seems to be dissolving into the sky, is a deeper, dreamier, melancholy blue, the blue at the farthest reaches of the places where you see for miles, the blue of distance. The light that does not touch us does not travel the whole distance. The light that gets lost gives us the beauty of the world, so much of which is in the color blue. For many years I've been moved by the blue at the far edge of what can be seen, that color of horizons, of remote mountain ranges, of anything far away. The color of that distance is the color of an emotion, the color of solitude and of desire, the color of there seen from here, the color of where you are not, and the color of where you can never go. For the blue is not in the place those miles away at the horizon, but in the atmospheric distance between. The atmospheric distance between you and the mountains. Longing, says the poet Robert Haas, because desire is full of endless distances. Blue is the color of longing for the distances you never arrive in, for the blue world. One soft, humid, early spring morning, driving a winding road across Mount Tamalpais, the 2,500-foot mountain just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, a bend suddenly reveals a vision of San Francisco in shades of blue, a city in a dream, and I was filled with a tremendous yearning to live in that place. Should we close that? I guess it won't make a difference closing that door. And I was filled with a tremendous yearning to live in that place of blue hills and blue buildings. Though I do live there, I had just left there after breakfast, and the brown coffee and yellow eggs and green traffic lights filled me with no such desire. And besides, I was looking forward to going hiking on the mountain's west slope. We treat desire as a problem to be solved, address what desire is for, and focus on that something and how to acquire it, rather than on the nature and the sensation of desire. Though often it is the distance between us and the object of desire that fills the space in between with the blue of longing. I wonder sometimes if with a slight adjustment of perspective, it could be cherished as a sensation on its own terms, since it is as inherent to the human condition as blue is to distance. If you can look across distance without wanting to close it up, if you can own your longing in the same way that you own the beauty of the blue that can never be possessed. For something of this longing will, like the blue of distance, only be relocated, not assuaged, by acquisition and arrival, just as the mountains cease to be blue when you arrive among them, and the blue instead tints the next beyond. Somewhere in this is the mystery of why tragedies are more beautiful than comedies, and why we take a huge pleasure in the sadness of certain songs and stories. Something is always far away. Thank you. That was blue. This is the color orange. In 2011, I went to Japan a year after the triple disaster of the tsunami, earthquake, and Fukushima nuclear disaster. I wrote a very journalistic and political piece about how Japanese people were responding to the disaster itself and to the various forms of institutional failure, the mutual aid, the ways communities were connecting and taking care of each other, etc. And then at the end of, and I was also on tour for my book, A Paradise Built in Hell, which had been translated into Japanese and became very relevant to a lot of people for that experience of disaster. And I got really sick with bronchitis. It was a fairly intense tour, and then I had 2 days in Kyoto. And so I wrote the serious journalistic piece about, and then I wrote this piece that's a bit more lyrical. And I'm a huge fan of Virginia Woolf's extremely long sentences. There's that super fucking annoying Strunk and White, never use one word, will never use two words when one word will do. And it's like, do what? You know, like, you know, and take it from me. Sometimes use 11 words when only one word will do, but not do anything interesting. You know, you don't always want long excess and poetic digression and adjectival overkill, but, you know, live it up. Go wild. So, the first sentence is more, I'll tell you when I'm at the end of it, because it's going to go for a while. And I actually got an assignment to write about an artist who makes these beautiful images made by dipping water. I'm dipping paper coated with cyanotype, which makes a blue image in bodies of water, and letting the moving water shape, you know, the way the water moves creates an image. And I was like, how do I even write about something so fluid, so playing with chance and possibility, etc. And so I wrote a 2,500 word essay in 7 sentences. It was super fun. I like me a long sentence. You know, you gotta have some short sentences sometimes too, but you don't fucking have to ever be Ernest Hemingway. Ever. Just don't do that. When I was young, all these men who thought writing might be for sissies were very attached to Ernest Hemingway and the idea that this kind of clipped masculine style was the very acme of good writing. And I get that, like, early on they were reacting against the purple prose of the Victorians, the kind of Bulwer-Lytton, overwritten stuff. But then we got stuff that's kind of underwritten with its own sentimentality of masculinity. And look at me, do I look like I aspire to be masculine? I think we can answer that question successfully. So, I digress. You know, sometimes use 11 words where one word will do something boring. At arrival gates, the Inari Shrine in Kyoto, Japan. After the long flight across the Pacific, after the night in the tiny hotel room selected so I could walk to the world's busiest train station in the morning, after the train north to the area most impacted by the tsunami and the great Tohoku earthquake of March 11, 2011, after the meetings among the wreckage with people who'd seen their villages and neighbors washed away, after seeing the foundations of what had once been a neighborhood so flattened it looked like a chessboard full of shards, after hearing from so many people with grief and rage in their voices talking about walls of water and drownings and displacement and refuge, but also about betrayal by the government in myriad ways, after the Christian minister pontificated forever while the Buddhist priests held their peace in the meeting my host secretly scheduled at the end of the 12-hour workday, after I told people I was getting sick but the meeting went on, after I left the meeting in hopes of getting to the hotel and stood outside in the cold northern night for a long time as a few snowflakes fell, or was it raindrops? I forget. After the sickness turned into a cough so fierce I thought I might choke or come up with blood or run out of air, after the tour continued regardless, after the speaking tour at the universities, after the conferences where I talked about disaster and utopia, after the trip to the conference in Hiroshima, where I walked and saw with my own eyes the bombed places I had seen in pictures so often, and met with octogenarians who told me, with the freshness of people who had only recently begun to tell. The story of what they had seen and been and done and suffered and lost on August 6, 1945, after the sight of the keloid scars from the nuclear fallout that had drifted onto the arms of a schoolboy 67 years before, so that he grew into a man who always wore long sleeves even in summer. After the long walks along the beautiful river distributaries of Hiroshima and among its willows and monuments to the vaporized and poisoned dead, draped in garlands of paper cranes amid plum trees in bloom, but not yet cherries, after the one glorious day in Kyoto when I was neither at work nor overwhelmed and alone, but accompanied by a pair of kind graduate students, after a day of wandering through old Buddhist temples with them and seeing the dim hall of the 1,000 golden Buddhas lined up in rows, in long rows, I arrived at the orange gates. I guess you can tell that was one sentence. But wait, there's more. You get off the local train from the city of Kyoto and walk through a little tourist town of shops with doorways like wide open mouths, disgorging low tables of food and crafts and souvenirs, and then walk uphill, then upstairs under a great torii gate, one of those structures with a wide horizontal beam extending beyond the pillars that hold it up, like the Greek letter tau, and then a plaza of temples and buildings and vendors, and then you keep going up. There are multiple routes up the mountain, and the routes take you through thousands of further torii gates, each with a black base and a black roof-like structure across the crosspiece. A structure atop the crosspiece, each lacquered pure, intense orange on the cylindrical pillars and crosspiece. The new ones are gleaming and glossy. Some of the old ones are dull, their lacquer cracked, or even rotting away so that the wood is visible underneath. The orange is so vivid, it's as though you have at last gone beyond things that are colored orange, to the color itself, particularly in the passages where the torii gates are just a few feet apart, or in one extraordinary sequence, many paces long of gates only inches apart, a tunnel of total immersion in orange. Vermilion, say some of the accounts, but I saw pure intense orange. Nearly every gate bears black inscriptions on one side, and if I could read Japanese, I might have read individuals, business people and corporations expressing their gratitude, because rice and prosperity and business are all tied up together in the realm of the Shinto god Inari. But I couldn't. The place was something else to me. I later read that the Fushima Inari Taishi is the head shrine of 30,000 or so Shinto shrines in Japan, devoted to Inari. It is said to have been founded in 711 and burned down in 1468 during a civil war, but much of it seems to have been replaced in overlapping waves, so that the whole is ancient and the age of the parts varied, some of them very new. The gates seem designed to pass through, and the altars, platforms and enclosures of stone slabs and obelisks and stone foxes, for stillness, so that the landscape is a sort of musical score of moving and pausing. The altars looked funereal to a Western eye, with the stone slabs like tombstones, but they were something altogether different. The foxes were everywhere, particularly at these altar zones. Moss and lichen grow on their stone or cement backs, so some are more green than gray, and others are spotted with lighter gray. They often have red cloth tied around their necks, the fabric faded to dusty pink. And there at the altar sites are roped garlands and stones with inscriptions carved into them. The foxes, hundreds of them, a few at a time, sit up often in pairs, sometimes with smaller torii gates that were offerings arrayed around them, and sometimes even smaller foxes with the gates, as though this might continue on beyond the visible into tinier and tinier foxes and gates. You could buy the small foxes and gates at the entrance in some places on the mountainside. Foxes, I know, are kitsune in Japan, the magical shapeshifters in folktales and woodblock prints and manga and anime now, who pass as human for months or years, becoming beautiful brides who run away, or courtiers who serve aristocrats, but serve another unknown purpose as well. The foxes at the Inari shrine are the god's messengers, a website later told me, more beneficent than some of the foxes in the stories. Elusive, beautiful, unpredictable, kitsune in this cosmology represent the unexpected and mysterious and wild aspects of nature. Rain during sunshine is called a fox's wedding in Japanese. Gates, foxes, foxes, gates. That was a short sentence. The gates lead you to gates and to foxes. The trails wind all over the slope of the steep forested hill. Most of the literature speaks as though there's a trail you take, but there are many. If you keep going, you might come to a dense bamboo forest with trunks as thick as the poles of streetlights, and a pond beyond that, or you might just keep mounting forest paths that wind and tangle with every now and again a little pavilion selling soft drinks and snacks, notably tofu pockets, inari sushi said to be the fox's favorite food, and more gates, unpainted stone, as well as lacquered wood. Pronunciation apologies to anyone Japanese who might be here. Arrival implies a journey, and almost all the visitors that day arrived out of a lifetime in Japan, seeing a different place than I did, traveling mostly in small groups, seeming to know why they were there and what to expect. I came directly from the grueling tour of disaster, but with a long-time interest in how moving through space takes on meaning, and how meaning can be made spatially with church and temple designs, landscape architecture and paths, roads, stairs, ladders, bridges, labyrinths, thresholds, triumphal arches, all the grammar that inflects the meaning of our movement. I'd been invited to Japan for the one-year anniversary of the triple disaster, reporting on the aftermath and talking about my book, A Paradise Built in Hell, which had been translated into Japanese and published just before one of the 5 largest recorded earthquakes hit the country, and the ocean rose up to in places 140 feet and scoured the shore, and the 6 Fukushima nuclear reactors fell apart and began to spread radiation by air and by sea. But that's another story. The Inari shrine was not part of it. My encounter there wasn't the culmination of that journey, but perhaps a reprieve from it and an extension of other journeys and questions I've carried for a long time. Arrival is the culmination of the sequence of events, the last in the list, the terminal station, the end of the line. And the idea of arrival begets questions about the journey and how long it took. Did it take the dancer 2 hours to dance the ballet? Or 2 hours plus 6 months of rehearsals? Or 2 hours plus 6 months, plus a life given over to becoming the instrument that could, over and over, draw lines and circles in the air with precision and grace? Sumi painters paint with famous speed, but it takes decades to become someone who could manage a brush that way, who had that feeling for turning leaves or water into a monochromatic image. You fall in love with someone, and the story might be of how you met, courted, consummated, but it might also be of how before all that, time and trouble shaped you both over the years, sanded your rough spots and wore away your vices and your scars. I'm going to do that whole one over again to get it right. It's funny because when you write these things, you feel like you know exactly what you're doing. When you read them, it's like, oh, it's all in the emphasis and pauses. I often think written and spoken are 2 completely different languages. And spoken depends, since you can't see the punctuation, and the spacing depends a lot on emphasis. And when you read your own written aloud, you sometimes get it wrong. You fall in love with someone, and the story might be of how you met, courted, consummated, but it might also be of how before all that, time and trouble shaped you both over the years, sanded your rough spots, and wore away your vices, until your scars and needs and hopes came together like halves of a broken whole. Culminations are at least lifelong, and sometimes longer when you look at the natural and social forces that shape you, the acts of the ancestors, of illnesses or economics, immigration and education. We are constantly arriving. The innumerable circumstances are forever culminating in this glance, this meeting, this collision, this conversation, like the pieces in a kaleidoscope forever coming into new focus, new flowerings. But to me, the gates made visible not the complicated ingredients of the journey, but the triumph of arrival. Time seemed to me as I walked all over the mountain, more and more enraptured and depleted, a series of moments of arrival, like film frames, if film frames with their sprockets were gateways, and maybe they are. They turn by the projector, but as they go, each frame becomes an opening through which light travels. I was exalted by a landscape that made tangible that elusive sense of arrival, that palpable sense of time that so often eludes us. Or rather, the sense that we are arriving all the time, that the present is a house in which we always have one foot, an apple we are just biting, a face we are just glimpsing for the first time. In Zen Buddhism, you talk a lot about being in the present and being present. That present is an infinitely narrow space between the past and future, the zone in which the senses experience the world, in which you act, however much your mind may be mired in the past or racing into the future, whatever the consequences of your actions. I had the impression midway through the hours I spent wandering that time itself had become visible, that every moment of my life as I was passing through orange gates always had been and always would be passing through magnificent gates that only in this one place are visible. Their uneven spacing seemed to underscore this perception. Sometimes time grows dense and seems to both slow down and speed up. When you fall in love, when you're in the thick of an emergency or a discovery, other times it flows by limpid as a stream across a meadow, each day calm and like the one before, not much to remember, or time runs dry and you're stuck, hoping for change that finally arrives in a trickle or a rush. All these metaphors of flow can be traded in for solid ground. Time is a stroll through orange gates. Blue mountains are constantly walking, said Dogen Zenji, the monk who brought Sato Zen to Japan. And we are also always constantly walking through those particular Shinto pathways of orange gates. Oh, or so it seemed to me that day of exhaustion and epiphany. Oh, there's more. Just getting some hair out of my mouth. What does it mean to arrive? The fruits of our labor, we say, the reward, the harvest, the home, the achievement, the completion, the satisfaction, the joy, the recognition, the consummation. Arrival is the reward. It's time you aspire to on the journey. It's the end. But on the mountain south of Kyoto, on a day just barely spring, on long paths whose only English guidance was a few plaques about not feeding the monkeys I never saw anyway, arrival seemed to be constant. Maybe it is. I wandered far over the mountain that day until I was outside the realm of the pretty little reproduction of an antique map I'd purchased and gone beyond the realm of the gates. I was getting tired after 4 hours or so of steady walking. The paths continued, the trees continued, the ferns and mosses under them continued, and I continued, but there were no more Torii gates. I came out in a manicured suburb with few people on the streets and walked out to the valley floor, and then back into the next valley, over and up again through the shops, to the entrance of the shrine all over again. But I could not arrive again, though I walked through a few more gates and went to see the tunnel of orange once again. It was like trying to go back to before the earthquake, before knowledge. An epiphany can be as indelible as a trauma. Once I was through those gates and through that day, I would never enter them for the first time and understand what they taught me for the first time. All you really need to know is that there's a hillside in Japan in which time is measured in irregular intervals, and every moment is an orange gate, and foxes watch over it, and people wander it, and the whole is maintained by priests and by donors, so that gates crumble and gates are erected. Time passes and does not, as elsewhere nuclear products decay and cultures change and people come and go, and that the place might be one at which you will arrive someday, to go through the flickering tunnels of orange, up the mountainside, into this elegant machine not for controlling or replicating time, but maybe for realizing or blessing it. Or maybe you have your own means of being present, your own for seeing that at this very moment you are passing through an orange gate. Thank you. And I don't know what I've done with the time. I think I've used it all up, but I have one very short thing. That was a piece Granta, the magazine, was doing, I think a Japan issue, and this was a while after I'd been there. And, but that, everything I've read here was such a pleasure to write. But the thing I'm going to read now, I wrote on election night of 2024, as it sunk in that Trump had won again and that we were going to enter the nightmare again, only far more so than before. I wrote an essay about hope that was the other most viral thing I've done, along with Men Explain Things to Me, that became the book Hope in the Dark. And when Trump got elected the first time, I said, 13 years ago, I took personal responsibility for hope, and I'm not quitting now. And now it's let me do some basic math. I was an English major. 22 years since I took personal responsibility for hope, and it's a really good job, especially in a world where a lot of people seem to have taken personal responsibility for defeat, despair, surrender, giving up, etc. But I knew that people were going to crash. I knew I had to try and reach out. And so I wrote these 3 paragraphs at 11 p.m., and it's the single most viral thing I've ever done. And my friend, the artist Tina Rodriguez, says because Pedro Pascal shared it, it means we're married. But I have to say, he hasn't shown up a lot as a result. But it really went viral. It had an interesting life. Laurie Anderson recorded herself reading it. It just went everywhere. And it's so obviously I was visible enough before that the piece had some traction, but the ability to meet the moment for a few million people was pretty great. And I made it the little tailpiece, the credo at the end of this book. This is the British edition of No Straight Road Takes You Here. And so 3 paragraphs, and then I'll shut up and take questions if you guys want to hang out. 11 p.m., November 5th, 2024. They want you to feel powerless and to surrender and to let them trample everything, and you are not going to let them. You are not giving up, and neither am I. The fact that we cannot save everything does not mean we cannot save anything, and everything we can save is worth saving. You may need to grieve or scream or take time off, but you have a role no matter what, and right now good friends and good principles are worth gathering in. Remember what you love. Remember what loves you. Remember in this tide of hate what love is. The pain you feel is because of what you love. The Wobblies used to say, don't mourn, organize, but you can do both at once. You can be heartbroken or furious or both at once. You can scream in your car, which I did that night, or on a cliff. You can also get up tomorrow and water the flowers and call someone who's upset and check your equipment for going forward. A lot of us are going to come under direct attack, and a lot of us are going to resist by building solidarity and sanctuary. Gather up your resources, the metaphysical ones that are heart and soul and care, as well as the practical ones. People kept the faith in the dictatorships of South and Central America in the 1970s and 1980s, and the East Bloc countries and the USSR. Women are protesting right now in Iran, and people there are writing poetry. There is no alternative to persevering, and that does not require you to feel good. You can keep walking, whether it's sunny or raining. Take care of yourself, and remember that taking care of something else is an important part of taking care of yourself, because you are interwoven with the 10 trillion things in this single garment of destiny that has been stained and torn, but is still being woven and mended and washed. Thank you. I just want to add that single garment of destiny is a riff on Martin Luther King's famous "We are woven together in a single garment of destiny," and a beautiful sense of interconnection, non-separation, that is in some ways the antithesis of hate, of harm, of racism, of all the other ideas that I have no responsibility and no connection with those other people. But anyway, so Thank you all so much. You're lovely. I haven't gotten to do an actual reading in a long time. It's really interesting. I feel a little rusty. And like genuine thank you, because it was like, oh yeah, that's so different than being prepared to meet whatever crazy question gets hurled at me. And many of them are lovely and make me think and are illuminating, and some of them are kind of weird and hostile and stuff. And not from you guys' audience, like when you're on stage. Oh, anyway, never mind. So.
We have time for a few questions if you're open.
I am.
Okay.
Questions? Oh, yeah, you.
Given that you do journalism, but you also do nonfiction writing in a more lyrical and kind of creative style, I've been thinking a lot about what role journalism plays in America if the fourth estate concept kind of goes out the window, given its relation to the other pillars of democracy.
Yeah.
So there's like an emotional truth in where you take things in a more lyrical and less traditional journalistic space, but yeah, what roles do you think, or responsibilities does journalism, but also narrative, lyrical, nonfiction writing, or even fiction or anything you want to talk about, play in what we're facing right now?
I feel like journalism is dead long-lived journalism. Corporate media, and we saw this with a bunch of things that have happened recently, including putting Barry Weiss in charge of CBS News, which she's completely unqualified for, along with being a right-wing troll. And a lot of major media outlets are now owned by larger entertainment and corporate conglomerates who are interested in profit and not interested in the ethical responsibility to tell the truth. A lot of them are also really cowardly, or they have this kind of inside the beltway kind of horse race journalism where they're like, who's going to win, rather than is this the most immoral thing that ever happened? Or they just get caught up in normalizing and euphemisms. And so many things the most outrageous things that have ever happened in this country have happened since January 20th. The most lawless, the most anti-constitutional, some of the cruelest stuff like torpedoing those boats in the Caribbean, which is completely illegal and is killing people, innocent people, or, people who have not proven to have committed any crime in foreign waters. So, but there's also all this great journalism emerging. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the same reach. And I still see there are still really good journalists at the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the rest, and some of the networks and stuff. But it's interesting, and there have been periods under Trump where I felt like a more narrative opinion journalism actually does a better job, because, and I was trained as a journalist, and often people think context is editorializing and they strip it of context. So somebody says something, but you don't know it's a lie, or that it's illegal, or that it's the 40th time you've said it, or it echoes a white supremacist mantra and is a dog whistle, or, and so, and I feel that a lot of people, and I feel like the reason I feel like the American people are better than their government. If we had true democracy and good media, we would have a lot more people voting. There's a lot of voter suppression in a lot of different ways. Like I remember when, God, what was his name? The good Democrat won against the child molester in the Alabama special election when Jeff Sessions, who I call the Confederate squirrel, became Attorney General under Trump the first time, and Doug Jones. And it was a big relief that a Democrat won. I think it helped but it was kind of like, if there wasn't massive voter suppression of black people, Alabama probably would have been electing black Democrats all along. And so being grateful for the white guy was like, but also people are so misinformed, and there's so much weird gossipy scandal coverage of things that don't matter and don't affect you. I think something that's about to happen over the next year is people's lives are going to be devastated, but maybe they'll lose health care, the tariffs, the tax on undocumented, and anybody who resembles anybody undocumented are going to devastate the agricultural and food industries, the construction industry, the healthcare industry, etc. There's 19% fewer foreign students coming to this country, which is going to just devastate schools, including this, who are going to lose a lot of their tuition income, etc. And a lot of that stuff will be reported without connecting the dots. Why do things cost so much more? Why has construction slowed down? Why doesn't this work anymore? Why are people unemployed? And connecting the dots is often considered editorializing. And so for me, there's a continuum from some of the things I read that are not in any way overtly political, although I think in some sense everything is political. I think a lot of what Silicon Valley and the cheesy entertainment encourages us to be checked out, disembodied, disassociated, and to not really pay close attention. And a lot of mainstream journalism as well as entertainment encourages to accept cliches like that the world gets changed by muscly white guys and who are very good at violence, when the world, and we don't see very much entertainment in which the world gets changed the way the world really gets changed, which is by boring people who often don't look good in leotards, who are really good at persevering and going to meetings and inspiring other people to show up and stick with it. And so, I think that there's a continuum. And the big breakthrough for me as a writer, I was trained as a journalist, I was doing journalism, then I got a job at a little art magazine, I was doing art criticism. I was writing these very small, lyrical, unpublished things. And when I went to the Nevada test site, where the US and the UK were still testing nuclear bombs regularly at the rate of about 1 nuclear explosion a month in Nevada, while most people, including anti-nuclear activists, thought nuclear war was a terrible thing that might happen someday, I wanted to write about it. I always say the test site taught me to write because to describe the visceral experience of being a protester in the desert with this spectacular light and this terrible history and the convergence of all these histories and the experiential, the historical, the scientific, the political, made me realize that all these three things I've been treating separately were only separated according to conventions. That's part of my desegregation joke earlier on, and that I needed all of them to describe the richness of this experience. One of the ways the world has gotten changed profoundly in my lifetime is by people, who was it who said that if women just told the truth of their lives, the world would break into, was it Muriel? I was just gonna guess, yeah. And people coming forward to tell stories about being abused as children, about sexual assault and rape, etc., exposed all that, and these stories that are very personal added up to saying the kind of, the patriarchy is not trustworthy, should not be given unlimited power. The question about who's trustworthy to tell the truth in court or in any other circumstance needs to be rethought, etc. And the feminist revolution that really began with campus anti-rape activists and the Jodi Singh rape murder case in New Delhi and the Steubenville rape case was so amplified by people telling their stories on social media, this kind of Greek chorus. So even the most personal story can be political. So we need good stories. I also feel like a huge impact on this era in this country and in the English-speaking world is sitcoms and capitalism, consumerism, advertising are constantly telling us that we're selfish, trivial people. I think of it as like we're small. All we want is, sex, pretty things, easiness, nice toys, no hassle, etc. And what I found in the disasters I wrote about in A Paradise Built in Hell when I went to I think we're much bigger than that. We want to be part of public life. We want meaning. We want a larger sense of belonging. We want to have hope in the future. We want justice. We want the truth. And so even in a poem or a novel or a short story, the version of who we are matters tremendously. It cumulatively shapes the stories people have about who they are and who they can be. And what's amazing for me about disaster is that people are these bigger people, even though they've been told their whole lives that they were small. when they evacuated the World Trade Center, which I think was hit by those planes because it was a symbol of global capitalism and American capitalism, there was no sort of social Darwinist competitiveness of which capitalism is supposed to be. Nobody shoved, nobody pushed. A quadriplegic accountant was carried down 57 floors by his co-workers. People helped each other. It turned out nobody was a capitalist. You know, is that what is it? There's no atheists in a foxhole. There's no capitalists in a disaster. So I think there's a continuum, but I also think, and this is a very long thing, but this is great because this is something I've been thinking about my whole life. There's also this idea that we should, like, I'm a very political writer, that works for me. And a lot of times it's like, you just all should be writing about what's wrong with Donald Trump and how to overthrow fascism and instruction manuals and fuck poetry, etc. And something you see in history over and over again is people who are maybe making abstract paintings or cubist, like Picasso's making cubist paintings, but he's going to Spanish Civil War support meetings, you know, in the evenings, that we're all citizens, we all have, particularly in times of crisis, an obligation to be engaged. All art is political in some sense, but that doesn't mean you need to be a journalist in your fiction, poetry, nonfiction, etc., but to understand the ways that it is political matters. And I just do think the bad journalism got us into this, and I don't know if we'll get enough good journalism itself to get us out of it, but seeing people switching where they get their news is really interesting, and you know, and Silicon Valley is very involved in this corruption and distortion. We lose 3 local newspapers a week, partly because Silicon Valley, starting with Craigslist, undermined the financial basis for print journalism. Ads, including want ads, was a huge subsidy on top of subscribers. But this, I will stop before you get the whole Wikipedia free form, spoken word, whatever that was. So, other questions? Yeah.
It's clear that research is an important part of your writing process. Can you share a little bit about a project that was particularly difficult to research and how you went about it, and like what made it difficult and how you handled it?
I want to kind of answer the inverse of that question first, briefly. I taught at the journalism school, my alma mater, at UC Berkeley, and those journalists were such eager little beavers. I was trying to teach them to be essayists and trying to teach them that your entire life is a research project. You're always observing, you're always thinking, and for me something that often happens is one more thing happens. You can see that in some of the stuff I read tonight. One more thing happens, and then something I've been thinking about for years, suddenly all the pieces fall into place. Like the violin thing, clearly I'm already interested in climate change and trees, and the violin lets me talk about them in a fresh way. But I'm trying to think of difficult. And there's different kinds of difficult. I get shy with interviewing people, which I had to do a lot for A Paradise Built in Hell. With my book on Edward Muybridge, River of Shadows, it was all archival, and talking to a few historians. It was technically difficult, but it was also really fun, and just technically difficult in that the material I needed was in the National Archives. It was in a library in Kingston upon Thames in England. It was in Eastman House, the UC Berkeley and Stanford libraries, among other places. The San Francisco Historical Society. But I actually love research. I think it's present. There's a couple movies. There's, and I'm forgetting both of their names. Well, She Said, about breaking the Harvey Weinstein sexual abuse story. And then there's, what's the one about the Catholic Church in Boston? Thank you, Spotlight. And you're really kind of on the hunt, and it's so exciting finding things and seeing things fall into place, and with old stuff, archival stuff, feeling like here's some things that people never connected, here's something that nobody seems to be looking at, just the thrill of the original document. Sometimes when you're looking at something really old, and starting to find the patterns and the relationships and finding the really exciting things. So it's often been difficult, but never really in a way where like it sucked, it was miserable. Like for the Muybridge book, he made a panorama of San Francisco that was good with large plate photographs that are 8x10s in 1876, and then he made a superlative panorama with mammoth plate photographs that was a lot weirder and more creative. And these very unreliable scholars in the 70s said, oh, he remade that because his studio with the negatives burned down. And I needed to know, did his studio actually burn down? A wonderful photo historian said, at a certain point you just have to call it, you have to decide what happens. But I got into the San Francisco Public Library's microfilm room, and I just scrolled through the photojournals from the time there, and I did that elsewhere because it probably would have been reported if a studio burned. There were like these professional association photojournals. But I looked at every page of the San Francisco Chronicle like every day from 1876 to 1878. And it gave me such a sense of the texture of the time. All those ads for weird things we don't use anymore, coal scuttles and buggy whips and corsets and stuff. And okay, some of you may be using buggy whips and corsets together, but I don't want to hear about it. And the little crime things and this wire service stories and stuff. But I found this thing, and this is why I think some of the big name historians who have research assistants, it's a little bit like some basic searches. They will find what you're looking for, but they can't find what you don't know you're looking for. There was this absolutely amazing story. Arthur C. Clarke, I think it was, said that all new technology at first seemed like magic or something like that. I'm misquoting, but when the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone was first invented, because this book was very much about the way technology, including photography and the railroad, etc., had changed the world. When the telephone first arrived, the idea that you could talk to somebody, who was miles, towns away, just seemed completely supernatural. And this was during the big spiritualist post-Civil War revival, etc. I found a perfectly serious article in the San Francisco Chronicle, and yes, it does say something about the Chronicle, about a man who had got one of the newfangled telephones installed and got business calls during the day, and at night the dead called. Because, a disembodied voice was like spirits and the dead. And that fit in with writing about the ghost dance that Native people were dancing in northernmost California, the Modoc, at exactly the same time, which was a technology like to make time run backwards and to make the dead come back to life. The ghost dance was supposed to bring on a kind of apocalypse where white people disappeared and the dead resurrected, and all the animals white people had hunted out and all the grass came back. And so I was able to correlate all this, and it was because of that however many hours of scrolling through scratchy microfilm. So it's been difficult in the sense that it's taken a lot of work, but and sometimes, it can be there can be boring bits, but it also can be joyful and exciting, and really the thrill of the chase and seeing the patterns and feeling connected to stuff that illuminates the world for me. So, should we wrap it up or take another one? It's after 9. Oh wait, we've got an arm that's really, really up there. Okay. Look at that arm.
Before we use the topic of researching, I'm learning about researching, and I know how to know if the website is trustworthy or not.
I kind of can't hear you.
How can you know if the website is trustworthy or not when you're researching?
That's a tricky question, and being trained as a journalist, I feel like you can do absolutely anything you want in writing, but you have to label the product correctly, and it's just like labeling turpentine and vodka differently in the cabinet. And, for example, there's been a lot of wobbliness about nonfiction being a little too creative, and I think it's fine. I think the writer Michael Ondaatje is an incredibly beautiful writer, and he wrote these kind of fictionalized things about the outlaw Billy the Kid and Buddy Bolden, one of the creators of jazz music in turn of the century New Orleans. And both of them are well documented. It feels like you can do whatever you want. But when you lie about somebody living or somebody who we don't have other, like, you know, sure, write a novel with Abraham Lincoln. And actually, I love Lincoln in the Bardo, and that is definitely fiction. And George Saunders' prize-winning novel. But I feel like you owe your readers to let. I was trained as a journalist. You have responsibility to three things. You have responsibility to the readers to be honest with them so they know what they're reading. If you've made something up, and there's a lot of filling in conversations now and stuff, and slightly nonfiction. There's a bunch of memoirs from the 90s and stuff where I'm like, I don't actually think you remember all these long conversations your parents had when you were 5. And that's relatively harmless, but it's a slippery slope. When I was teaching writing, I used to say, it's the slippery slope from the typewriter your stepfather didn't actually break, which was part of a memoir that became a scandal because so much of it turned out to not be true 20-something years ago. A slippery slope from that to the weapons of mass destruction Saddam Hussein didn't have. And but you have a responsibility to the reader to not mislead them. And, you know, like we know Oliver Twist isn't real, and Dante didn't actually get a grand tour through the 9 circles of hell. Like, fiction can be fiction, but if you're writing, just correct labeling. But you have a responsibility to the readers, to the subjects, and I had a big fight when I was on judging books for a literary award once, with a book that really played fast and loose with the facts about somebody who probably wasn't going to be written about again, and which I thought was misleading to the readers, destructive to the subject's reputation, and also discriminating against the group they belonged to. And it was interesting because the others didn't have journalism training and they just thought it was very well written. And it really made me think about the fact that, yes, there's aesthetic beauty, but there's also moral beauty and moral ugliness, which became useful for writing about George Orwell, who was very interested in the moral beauty as well as the aesthetic beauty. And then you have a responsibility to the historical record. So I think of all those things as just being important. And if people want to fictionalize a little, and it's interesting, like Cheryl Strayed's bestseller about walking the Pacific Crest Trail, Wild, she actually, because it was in the era of all these scandals, says that she kept very detailed journals, which is how she was able to reconstruct things with such detail. I think just not misleading people is the first thing you have to do. And but everything, you're always choosing, even when you're just a news reporter doing crime reporting, what do you choose to describe, what do you leave out? And we're always editing, we're always deciding what people should know, how to represent it. It's always weird to me to see things in the New York Times that have this very editorial language, really trying to slant your point of view, presented as journalism. And I am rambling. I actually had a very intense day involving 2.5 hours of kayaking with the climate group I'm on the board of, and then spending a bunch of time brainstorming about climate. And I drove 120 miles, so I'm slightly toast, and which might explain the rambliness. Thank you so much.